Imagine a kingdom that stretched across vast lands, with mountains, rivers, and deserts, where fearless warriors and powerful rulers forged an empire with strength and intelligence. Now, imagine that the leader of this land was a woman, like few others in history, who not only ruled with wisdom, but also led her soldiers into epic battles. I'm talking about Queen Amina of Zazzau, a figure immortalized not only for her military achievements, but for her strategic vision and courage that transcended centuries. And did you know that her story is full of mysteries and adventures? If you're curious to learn more about this queen who defied her own destiny, like, comment, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next incredible stories. Now let's get to the point. Did you know that this queen's story begins long before she became a warrior? Let's go back in time to understand her origins and how she became the legend she is today. Amina was born around 1533 in the city of Zazzau, one of the most powerful and respected kingdoms in what we now call Nigeria. The Zazzau Empire was a land of riches, but also of challenges. Imposing mountains and vast deserts separated its people, but courage always united the inhabitants of this region. Zazzau was not only known for its grandeur, but also for the strength of its warriors who protected their lands with bravery. Amina, the daughter of King Nikitau and a warrior princess, grew up in an environment where honor and strength were revered. From a young age, Amina was immersed in a world where battle and strategy were part of everyday life. Her father, King Nikitau, was a respected leader, but the true strength of the kingdom lay in the hands of his daughter. Amina was not raised to be just a princess who confined herself to the palaces. She was educated to understand the art of war, alliances, and leadership. However, her story would not be written easily. Her path, as we will see, would not always be smooth, and her journey to become a great queen would be marked by challenges and difficult choices. Zazzau, like all great kingdoms of the time, was always seeking expansion. The surrounding lands were coveted, and any leader would need to be cunning, strong, and strategic to maintain their position. Amina saw what was needed to ensure that Zazzau would not be invaded, but also to conquer new lands and consolidate the power of her people. She grew up with this goal in mind, to protect and expand the empire. However, before her ascension to the throne, Amina had to face a great challenge: her older brother, Karama, who ruled Zazzau. Karama's leadership was respected, but he did not have the same drive for expansion as his sister. Amina knew that the destiny of Zazzau needed more, much more. It was necessary to be bold, as she had always believed herself to be. Amina's destiny was shaping up to be something great, but she didn't yet know how her life would change forever. Something happened that made her take the reins of Zazzau's history: the death of her brother. When Karama passed away, many were in doubt about who should take the throne. It was then that the great leader, with a heart full of courage, stood up and took the place she always believed was rightfully hers. And that's how she ascended to the throne of Zazzau, with a clear purpose: to ensure that her people would be stronger and more respected than ever. But how could a young woman in a male-dominated world cope with the pressure of governing, waging war, and making decisions that would impact not only her kingdom, but all of West Africa? Amina's life was about to change dramatically, and she knew that in taking the throne, she would have to be more than just a ruler. She would have to be a visionary leader, someone capable of handling the complex political, social, and military issues of the Zazzau Empire. The death of her brother, King Karama, left a void on the throne, but at the same time, an opportunity for Amina to take control of her destiny and the future of her people. And even in a world where men ruled most kingdoms, Amina did not waver. When news of Karama's death spread, many assumed that the reign of Zazzau would fall to one of Amina's brothers, men who, in theory, were more suited for the role. But Amina had something the others did not: unwavering determination and a deep understanding of what was needed to protect the kingdom. She knew that the future of Zazzau depended on quick, bold decisions, and that was what led her to take her place on the throne. Amina not only assumed the reign with courage, but also with profound political intelligence. She understood that, in addition to being an excellent warrior, she needed to ensure the loyalty of her subjects and reinforce her authority. Instead of opting for a distant and solitary government, she made a point of being a leader close to her people, listening to advice, strengthening alliances, and dealing with the affairs of the kingdom with the same diligence that she would show in battle. Under her rule, the city of Zazzau prospered. Amina knew that to ensure the stability of her reign, it was crucial that Zazzau be not only a military powerhouse, but also a center of commerce and culture. She encouraged the expansion of trade routes, promoting the trade in gold, salt, and slaves, which not only brought wealth to the kingdom, but also helped to finance her military expeditions. But Amina was not just interested in wealth. She had a broader vision for Zazzau. For her, success lay not only in conquering lands, but in maintaining a united and powerful empire. Her rise to the throne was marked by wise decisions, bold strategies, and a deep love for her people. She was a fearless ruler, but also a leader with an immense sense of responsibility for the future of her empire. The people of Zazzau soon realized that Amina was no ordinary queen. She had not only inherited the throne, but had earned it with her strength, intelligence, and foresight. Under her leadership, the kingdom had not only survived, but flourished. But one thing remained: she needed to protect the kingdom and expand its power. As a queen who was not afraid of war, Amina knew that her leadership would be tested with every battle. War was coming, and Amina did not hesitate. She immediately began planning her first major military campaign as queen, one that would shape her destiny and the future of Zazzau. But who would the enemy be? How would she face the resistance that would arise on the borders of her empire? And most importantly, how would she ensure that her legacy would last forever? Now that Amina was firmly established as queen, she could not be just a symbolic ruler. She knew that the true strength of Zazzau depended on how she handled the military challenges that lay ahead. Amina did not shy away from the fight. Instead, she threw herself directly onto the battlefield. For her, a leader should not just order his troops from afar, but be by their side, facing danger head-on. And that is what made her a unique figure in history. From a young age, Amina was trained for war. She knew that her empire needed more than a queen who ruled with words. She needed to be a queen who inspired through action, and to achieve this, it was essential to demonstrate her skill in battle. Her first major campaign came shortly after assuming the throne, when she decided to expand the borders of Zazzau, conquering new lands that would guarantee the wealth and security of the kingdom. Amina used her strategic intelligence to lead her troops to a series of impressive victories. But what set her apart from other commanders was her ability to innovate military tactics. She understood that cavalry, with its fast and agile horses, would be a key to victory. So she trained her soldiers to use this force in an unbeatable way, attacking and retreating quickly, confusing their enemies. Her war tactics became legendary. Amina, with her adaptability, used the terrain to her advantage. She knew exactly when to attack, when to retreat, and most importantly, when to surprise. This strategic approach allowed Zazzau to expand almost unstoppably. By conquering other cities, she not only gained land, but also integrated new peoples into her empire, maintaining order and ensuring that loyalty was repaid with benefits such as protection and security. One of Amina's most impressive traits was her presence on the battlefield. She didn't just lead from behind, commanding her troops from a distance. Amina stood at the head of her cavalry, fighting alongside her soldiers, showing everyone that she was not just a ruler, but a true warrior. This inspired her men to fight with greater courage, for they knew that their queen was willing to risk herself, just as much as they were. She faced many kingdoms and tribes during her campaigns. One of the greatest challenges Amina faced was the resistance of local peoples who opposed the expansion of Zazzau. But the queen did not retreat easily. When an enemy seemed impossible to defeat, she innovated her tactics and surprised, becoming increasingly unbeatable. Each victorious battle increased her fame, not only in Zazzau, but also in the neighboring lands. Amina's name came to be feared by all who dared to challenge her power. But Amina knew that war was not just about conquering land. It was about protecting her people. Her vision for Zazzau was not limited to a militaristic empire, but rather a prosperous, secure, and strong nation. She knew that to keep her people at peace would require not only conquering, but also consolidating each victory. And that involved diplomacy, alliances, and above all, respect for the conquered people. Victories on the battlefield were not only a matter of honor, but also of survival for Zazzau. As a warrior queen, Amina ensured that her people had a respected place among the great powers of the time. Each conquest brought her wealth, power, and prestige, and this made her even more admired and, of course, more feared. Now that Zazzau was stronger than ever, what would happen when Amina had to face resistance greater than any other? What would happen when the forces she herself created began to put her own life at risk? After her initial victories, Amina had no time to rest or settle. She knew that to ensure the longevity of her empire, she needed to further expand Zazzau's borders, consolidating her influence and creating a strong and protected kingdom. But while her skill in combat was undeniable, Amina also understood that territorial expansion required more than simply military victories. For her, the true protection of Zazzau lay in ensuring that all of her new conquests were well defended and integrated into the kingdom. It was here that Amina introduced one of her most impressive innovations, the construction of fortifications along the newly conquered borders. She knew that in order to ensure that her enemies could not retake the territory, it was necessary to create solid defenses. These walls were not only symbols of power, but also strategic points that helped maintain order and security in the new lands. Throughout her campaign, she made a point of establishing these fortresses, which ended up becoming one of the landmarks of her reign. Zazzau's strength lay not only in her troops, but also in the imposing walls that protected her towns and villages. The goldmine of her strategy was the way she used these fortifications to deter invasions. She knew that the best way to keep her people safe was to ensure that there were no gaps in the borders that could be exploited by invaders. The queen had enormous walls built of stone and earth, much stronger than any that had existed in the region until then. These fortifications stretched along the trade routes, and even the most distant cities were protected by these enormous barriers. These walls became a true demonstration of Amina's power, showing that no one could challenge her empire without facing great difficulties. In addition to physical defenses, Amina knew that maintaining internal stability required a well-organized and engaged population. She made sure to establish an efficient administrative system to manage the conquered cities, ensuring that the kingdom's economy would thrive. Zazzau not only expanded territorially, but also became a vibrant trading hub, connecting many regions and facilitating the flow of goods such as salt, gold, and slaves. Her leadership focused on the prosperity of her people, and this meant ensuring that resources were well distributed and that Zazzau maintained its position as a center of power. But the kingdom's expansion also meant more enemies. Neighboring tribes, once rivals, now began to unite in resistance against Amina's growing empire. They saw Zazzau's power as a threat to their freedom and way of life, and they banded together to challenge Amina's rule. However, the queen did not back down in the face of these threats. She knew the risk was great, but she also believed that her military strength and defenses would be more than enough to protect the kingdom and keep the new lands under her control. The expansion of Zazzau was undoubtedly one of Amina's greatest achievements. By conquering and incorporating numerous cities and tribes, she not only expanded the territory of her kingdom, but also strengthened its authority. Amina's greatest strength lay in her ability to unite people under a single empire, with a common goal: the survival and success of Zazzau. However, this great expansion brought with it unforeseen challenges that Amina would have to face in order to ensure that the kingdom continued to prosper. Amina, the great warrior queen, knew that not all conquests would be easy. As her empire of Zazzau expanded, so did internal challenges and external threats. The resistance she faced came not only from neighboring tribes, but also from within her own empire, where the changes she was implementing caused tensions. After all, the expansion of an empire always brings with it challenges. With new territories and populations come new dynamics and new problems to be solved. The internal resistance Amina faced began with her own nobles. Many of the former rulers and leaders of the conquered tribes saw the queen not as a leader who had united them under a common banner, but as an outsider who had imposed her will and altered traditions. These nobles began to question her actions, fearing that they would lose power and control over their own lands. Amina, who had earned the respect of her soldiers and the people, now found herself challenged by the local elite. These internal conflicts were not only political but also cultural. Amina brought with her a more centralized and militaristic approach, something that did not please everyone. To many, the peace and stability she promoted seemed to be bought at too high price: freedom from local rulers and traditional social structures. But Amina was not one to back down from a challenge. She used her diplomatic skills to secure the loyalty of the nobles, negotiating with them strategically without relinquishing her control. She understood that internal peace was as crucial as external security. At the same time, she ensured that the conquered areas remained loyal, forging alliances through marriages, treaties, and agreements. However, even as she faced these internal tensions, an even more dangerous threat was emerging on Zazzau's borders. Several neighboring kingdoms, which had previously remained isolated, began to unite in resistance against Amina's growing empire. They saw her kingdom as a threat to their freedom and began to form a coalition. As the neighboring tribes united, they brought with them a significant military force. The battlefronts expanded, and Amina had to mobilize her armies to face the largest coalition of enemies she had ever faced. This alliance of enemies brought with it even more difficult and intense battles. Amina had to innovate even more in her military tactics. Her response was swift and decisive. She used the fortresses of Zazzau and the cavalry troops to surround and isolate the enemies. At the same time, her ability to negotiate and manipulate politics became an asset. She initiated a series of strategies to weaken the coalition of her enemies, trying to divide the tribes that had united against her, using her diplomatic cunning to sow distrust among them. The final siege came when Amina led a decisive attack against the enemy forces. Using the fortifications she had established, she managed to block the advance of her forces and, with a lightning attack, routed the coalition. The enemy forces, although numerically superior, could not withstand the planning and quick action of Zazzau's troops. The result was a crushing victory for Amina, and the coalition of rival kingdoms was broken. However, this great victory did not come without sacrifice. The battle had left deep scars, both on the battlefield and within Zazzau. Amina knew that, although she had won, the cost had been high. The stability of the empire still hung in the balance. Many of her allies began to question the future of the kingdom, and the weight of power seemed increasingly difficult to bear. Now more than ever, Amina knew she needed to ensure the unity of Zazzau if the kingdom was to remain strong. She began to focus not only on expanding the territory, but on solidifying her leadership, restoring the trust of the people and the nobility. Every decision now had to be made with greater caution. The empire was at the height of its power, but at the same time, its fragility was more exposed than ever. After her great victory over the coalition of enemy kingdoms, Amina not only consolidated her empire as never before, but also made it clear that her leadership was destined to be remembered for generations to come. The kingdom of Zazzau, though beset by internal threats and tensions, flourished under her leadership, and she became one of the most powerful and respected figures in West Africa. But like all great queens, Amina knew that the true test of her reign would be to ensure that her legacy would be not only lasting, but also immortal. Amina, with her indomitable spirit, took steps to further strengthen her empire. Although the battles had been won, the queen knew that the true greatness of Zazzau did not lie in military victories alone. It was crucial that the kingdom establish itself as a cultural and commercial center, a true power in West Africa, capable of withstanding any invasion. She made a point of promoting education, encouraging the formation of competent leaders and soldiers, and ensuring that her people were well trained in the arts of war, administration, and commerce. In addition, Amina also established an effective system of governance to manage the vast lands she had conquered. She appointed loyal governors to the far-flung regions of her empire, and ensured that the fortifications that had contributed so much to Zazzau's security were maintained. But Amina's true strength lay in her ability to unite the tribes and peoples under her rule, creating a common culture that transcended ethnic and religious differences. Zazzau, under her leadership, became a place where diversity was not only respected, but also considered a point of strength. Amina's strategic vision was also crucial to the kingdom's economic prosperity. With control of trade routes, Zazzau became a meeting point between the desert and the rainforest, facilitating the trade of salt, gold, slaves, and other precious goods. This trade not only brought Zazzau riches, but also helped solidify the kingdom as a powerhouse in trans-Saharan trade. But Amina was not limited to conquering land and wealth. She was also creating a culturally strong empire with a distinct identity that would endure for centuries. But time passed, and the queen, who had been a tireless warrior, could not fight forever. Eventually, the forces of nature and the weight of the years began to take their toll on her health. Yet, even in the face of the threat of aging, Amina maintained her imposing presence. Her final battles were fought not only on the military front, but also in politics, trying to ensure that Zazzau would remain strong after her death. She passed power to her successor, keeping the kingdom stable and united until the end of her life. The cause of Amina's death is shrouded in mystery. Some accounts say she died in battle, while others suggest she died of natural causes after ruling for more than 3 decades. But whatever the manner of her departure, one thing is certain: Amina's legacy lives on through her conquests, her innovations, and the empire she left behind. Amina's impact was not only military, but also cultural and political. Her ability to unite diverse peoples and cultures was one of the greatest achievements of her reign. She was a woman who did not limit herself to being a queen, but became a symbol of female power, courage, and leadership in a world where men dominated most spheres of power. Even after her death, Amina's name continued to be revered. Many legends and stories about her have been told over the centuries, cementing her as a near-mythical figure. The memory of her courage, wisdom, and epic battles has lived on for generations to come, and her legacy has been immortalized both in the fortifications she built and in the stories that continue to be passed down from generation to generation. Amina was not just a warrior queen. She became an enduring icon, remembered not only for the exploits of her empire, but for the way she defied the conventions of her time. Today, her story continues to inspire leaders, women, and warriors around the world, showing that with courage, determination, and a vision for the future, even the greatest obstacles can be overcome. Amina's name has spanned centuries and continents. Even after her death, the warrior queen continued to be remembered as one of the most powerful figures in African history. She was not just a military leader or strategist. Amina became a myth. Her legacy transcended real history and became something even more powerful, a symbol of strength, resilience, and femininity. But as with all legends, there is a mystery that is never fully solved. How much of Amina's story is fact and how much is folklore? In the northern regions of Nigeria, where Zazzau, present-day Zaria, still holds its heritage, stories about Amina continue to be told, often with a tone of reverence. Younger generations hear of the warrior queen who, with unwavering courage, united tribes, expanded her empire, and challenged the limits imposed by the society of her time. The walls she built, the tactics she innovated, and the feats she achieved continue to be a source of pride and inspiration to many. The myth of Amina has also become intertwined with the history of her land. In Zazzau, many of the towns and villages she conquered remain as testaments to her greatness. The fortifications she built along the trade routes are still visible symbols of her vision and military strategy. The ancient walls surrounding the towns of Zazzau have stood the test of time, as has the memory of their queen. However, the historical truth about Amina is a little harder to discern. While accounts of her battles and conquests do exist, many of the details about her life may have been exaggerated or transformed over the years as the stories were passed down from generation to generation. But one thing is certain: Amina's image as a warrior leader who fought alongside her soldiers and commanded an empire with strength and intelligence remains immortalized. The way she stands out in an era dominated by male leaders makes her legacy all the more impressive. Today, Amina is often cited as one of the greatest female leaders in history. Her courage and strategic skill not only earned her respect on the battlefield, but also helped pave the way for the recognition of women in leadership, a lesson that remains true to this day. Amina's legend transcends time, showing that no matter the odds, one determined individual can change the course of history. In addition to her direct impact on Zazzau, Amina's legacy is also reflected in the cultural influences she left behind. Her victories, innovations, and manner of governing are studied to this day by historians, military strategists, and political leaders who recognize in her the mark of bold and visionary leadership. Even those unfamiliar with the details of her life know the impact she had on the formation of African empires and the rise of women to leadership positions. The legends of Amina are also a reminder of how history can be transformed by storytelling. In many versions of her story, she is described not only as a queen, but as an almost mythical figure with extraordinary powers, capable of defeating entire armies and performing impossible feats. She is portrayed in many versions almost as a warrior goddess, with her presence and command unstoppable. For many, she is more than a historical queen. She is an icon of resilience, feminine power, and unbreakable strength. And even today, Zazzau, the city she ruled, continues to revere her memory. Her image is celebrated at events and festivals, and the story of her accession to the throne and her military achievements are told to new generations. The warrior queen is not only a landmark in the history of Zazzau, but a symbol for all those who fight against adversity and strive for greatness. Regardless of the obstacles. As the centuries passed, Amina's legacy continued to evolve, crossing cultural boundaries and becoming a global symbol. What began as a story of a warrior queen in West Africa spread beyond the continent's borders to the four corners of the world. Her story inspired leaders, activists, and feminists across the globe, transforming Amina into an icon of female power and resilience. Amina's legend has gained new prominence in recent times as the fight for gender equality has intensified around the world. Women across cultures have begun to look to her not just as a historical figure, but as an example of how to challenge social and political norms. In a world where women were often seen as subjugated, Amina represented the possibility of a woman not only ruling, but also being an unstoppable warrior, capable of conquering both the battlefield and the hearts of her people. Amina's influence extended to feminist movements around the world, which found in her a figure of empowerment and struggle. Her story helped break stereotypes about what women can achieve and, most importantly, showed that female power is not limited to domestic domains, but can extend to government, war, and the leadership of entire empires. She became a reference, not only for women in leadership positions, but for all those who fight against oppression and for justice. Furthermore, Amina has come to be regarded as a pivotal figure in the study of power dynamics and leadership in African history. Historians and scholars around the world have studied her war tactics and government strategies, recognizing her genius not only in battle but also in managing an empire that lasted and prospered for centuries. The way she used her military victories to establish a solid economic and political system made her one of the most effective leaders of her time. Her reforms were instrumental in the growth and consolidation of Zazzau, and looking at her, many have come to realize that a great leader is one who sees beyond the immediate and thinks about the legacy she leaves for future generations. Today, Amina's figure is especially revered in the African context, where her image is celebrated as an example of female leadership. She is remembered in schools, monuments, and festivals, and is a constant inspiration for new leaders who seek to follow in her footsteps. Her story is also part of educational and cultural programs that seek to promote the history of the great African figures who shaped the continent. Amina is not just a queen of the past. She is a living queen in the collective memory, a woman who transcended the limitations of her time to become a universal figure of power and courage. And we cannot fail to mention Amina's impact on the arts and literature. Her battles, achievements, and leadership have become the subject of books, films, and even plays. Her life has been adapted and reimagined in many ways, always with an emphasis on her courage and strategic skill. She continues to be portrayed as a warrior heroine, but also as a wise and compassionate leader who knew how to balance strength with justice. And so her story remains relevant not only to those who study Africa or medieval history, but to anyone seeking to understand what it means to be a strong, resilient leader capable of changing the course of history. Amina is, without a doubt, a legend that resurfaces with each generation. Her memory is not limited to a specific historical period, but lives on, inspiring new movements, new leaders, and new achievements. She has become the embodiment of a timeless idea that no matter the gender or the circumstances, a person with courage, vision, and determination can, indeed, change the world. And so, Amina's story continues. She is remembered and celebrated as one of the greatest queens who ever lived. But her true greatness lies in the way she challenges us to this day to push our own limits and to believe that, just like her, we all have the power to conquer our own empires.